I had just returned from a week-long business trip in Austin, the kind that left your mind buzzing and your body aching from red-eye flights, delayed connections, and long meetings with men who only smiled when a contract was signed. The cab dropped me off a block from the house. I wanted the short walk to reset my head, to let the stillness of home seep in before I walked through that front door. My luggage wheels clacked against the sidewalk, a sound I usually found satisfying. But that evening, it felt heavy, like something was waiting that I wasn't ready for. The porch lights were off, but the glow from inside told me someone was home. Sloane. My wife. My everything, or so I thought. The woman I had built a life around, rearranged career paths for, missed family holidays for, took on extra work just to fund that bakery dream she'd abandoned within 6 months. But I never complained. I loved her, didn't I? That's what love was, a compromise. Quietly doing the hard things and never keeping score. I stepped up the last stair and set my bag down just beside the planter she always forgot to water. I reached for the doorknob, ready to knock, when I heard her voice. Not muffled, not indistinct. Clear as a bell through the cracked open living room window. Don't worry about the gambling debt, Eli. I'll make Grayson pay it. He never says no to me. The words slid down my spine like ice water. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't even feel the handle of my suitcase as it slipped from my hand and thudded against the porch. Eli. Her brother. The same Eli who had almost destroyed me 2 years ago, dragging my name through the mud with a false accusation that nearly cost me my job. He cornered me in the office break room, half drunk and entitled, demanding I get him a position he was never qualified for. When I refused, he retaliated with lies. A complaint. HR investigation. It took months and legal hell to clear my name. And through all of it, Sloane stood in the middle, begging me not to escalate, pleading that he's just lost, not evil. I forgave. For her. And now I stood there, listening to her not only align with the man who tried to ruin me, but use me. Treat me like a tool. A solution. A bank account. Her little puppet who never says no. I felt the crack before I heard it, the invisible fracture in the foundation of my marriage. It was soft, almost silent. But it split me in two. I didn't knock. I turned, picked up my bag slowly, like a man who'd just woken up in someone else's life. The pain wasn't fiery. Not yet. It was quiet, cold, dull. The kind of pain that doesn't scream. It whispers. You were never seen. I walked back down those porch steps, each one echoing louder than the last. My phone buzzed once. Sloane, probably wondering if I'd landed. I didn't look. I kept walking, past the hedge I planted, past the mailbox I fixed myself last fall, past the sidewalk chalk drawings left by the neighbor's kid, once a source of small joy, now just faded noise. I got in the car and sat there, the engine off, hands on the wheel. My heart was thudding slow and deep. My mouth was dry, but my mind was spinning. That voice, that sentence. He never says no to me. She said it with confidence. Not fear. Not guilt. Confidence. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway. No destination in mind, no plan. I just drove. I passed gas stations I didn't stop at, past exits for cities I didn't want to enter. I didn't even notice when the sun dipped below the horizon or when my phone finally gave up buzzing and went silent. The GPS in my dashboard asked if I wanted directions. I ignored it. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I saw the sign, Ocean View Lodge, vacancy. A coastal inn I'd never heard of, perched on the edge of cliffs that whispered promises of detachment. I pulled in, parked, walked to the check-in desk like a man whose name didn't matter. Grayson Lang, I said, voice low. My real name. Still clinging to it, though it felt like a stranger's. The woman behind the counter slid me a key without fuss. Room 203. Ocean-facing. I didn't unpack. I didn't undress. I just stepped out onto the small balcony and stood there, letting the salty wind hit my face, eyes fixed on the horizon that didn't care who I was or what I'd left behind. That was the moment I accepted it. I wasn't running away. I was waking up, and I wasn't going back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The room smelled faintly of salt and wood polish. I dropped my bag beside the dresser without opening it and sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, staring at the curtains that danced with the ocean breeze sneaking in through the open balcony door. Somewhere below, the waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, each one a reminder that something bigger, colder, and more honest than my marriage had always existed, steady, relentless, and impossible to manipulate. I reached for the remote and turned on the TV, letting it flash unfamiliar faces and irrelevant news. None of it mattered. I wasn't really watching. I was trying not to think. But it didn't work. Sloane's voice played over and over in my head like a broken record. Don't worry about the gambling debt, Eli. I'll make Grayson pay it. He never says no to me. Never. Says no. I stood abruptly, energy rising in me like static before a storm. My fingers clenched and unclenched at my sides. I moved to the small desk in the corner, opened my laptop, and connected to the hotel Wi-Fi. The login screen flickered to life. I typed in my credentials with the ease of muscle memory. Within seconds, I was inside every account Sloane had ever touched with me. Joint checking, savings, investment portfolios, our supposed emergency fund. It hit me all at once. I wasn't angry. I was clear. And clarity has a strange way of sharpening everything you thought you dulled out of love. She didn't see me as a man. She saw me as an infrastructure. Reliable. Silent. Producing. Never questioning. Never denying. Not anymore. The first transfer was easy. $87,000 from our joint savings to a private offshore account I had opened years ago at the advice of a client in case of lawsuits or business collapse. I'd never needed it. Until now. I moved onto the credit cards, American Express, Visa, the store cards I rarely used but always paid. I canceled the ones she used the most, left the low-limit cards active. She wouldn't notice at first. It would take days before she realized her platinum card would suddenly decline mid-brunch. Then came the lines of credit. I froze the home equity line she'd once floated as a backup for fun renovations. Locked it. She'd get the notice in a day or two. Maybe sooner, depending on how desperate Eli was. And then the joint investment account. I liquidated my half. Quietly. Moved it into a personal portfolio she didn't know existed. The financial planner was next. I wrote the email carefully and personally with language I learned from years of contract negotiation. Please remove Sloane Langford from access to all listed accounts. As of today, she no longer holds fiduciary authorization. Documentation will follow shortly. No explanation. Just action. The final touch was subtle. I changed the passwords on all our digital banking portals. Not just changed, rerouted. Even if she guessed the credentials, it would redirect her to a two-factor verification sent only to the new burner phone I picked up at a gas station off the interstate. It was 4:12 a.m. When I leaned back in the chair, eyes bloodshot but pulse steady. I looked around the room, simple, unremarkable, temporary, and felt more at home than I had in my own house for the past year. I thought back to every argument Sloane and I had avoided. Not fought, avoided. The way she dodged accountability with ease, guilt tripped with grace, and pivoted like a politician when things got uncomfortable. I remembered every time I chose peace over honesty, silence over confrontation. She'd built a castle on my back, brick by brick, never asking if the weight was too much, just assuming I'd hold it forever. And Eli? That snake slithered into our lives, sank fangs into my name, and walked away with barely a scratch. And Sloane, my wife, the woman who swore vows of loyalty, stood at his side with her hand in my pocket. I checked my phone. 5 missed calls. 2 voicemails. One from Sloane, cheerful, checking in. Another from Marcus, my friend and business partner. Hey man, just letting you know Sloane called looking for you. You okay? Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I opened a new file and titled it Protocol Drift. A name I came up with years ago, back when I half-joked that if my world ever collapsed, I'd vanish on the wind. It wasn't a joke anymore. I wrote out a checklist. Transfer funds, heavy checkmark, secure new phone, heavy checkmark, cancel cards, heavy checkmark, notify planner, heavy checkmark, no contact initiated, heavy checkmark. By morning, I was financially invisible. Not just gone, ghosted. I had erased my digital footprints from every place she could track. Sloane hadn't even noticed yet. She would. And when she did, she'd realize something far more valuable than money was gone, her control. Her assumption that I would always stay, always pay, always obey. Not this time. I stood up, stretched, and walked barefoot to the balcony again. The horizon was changing now, tinged with the faintest pink and orange. A new day. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. I wasn't done. Not even close. But now, I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was reclaiming my name. My life. And Sloane wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. I never imagined I would replay old wounds so vividly until I sat in that hotel room, sunlight cresting the horizon in pale ribbons, and realized how deeply I'd buried the memory of Eli's betrayal. It was 2 years ago, still sharp in my mind, though I forced myself to forget for Sloane's sake. Now it surged back, unforgiving and raw. It began with that afternoon in the Stanford office. I remember the creak of the carpet under my shoes as I walked down the hallway toward my corner office. Wooden door, brass plaque, private haven for a man who prided himself on control. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I glanced down. No name, just digits. I hesitated, then answered. Is this Grayson Langford? A smooth voice, clipped and professional. Yes, I said, straightening my tie even though no one was watching. I'm calling from HR. We've received a complaint of harassment against you. You're to come in immediately. My heart stuttered. Harassment? Me? I was the one who refused to hire her brother, Eli, for an entry-level analyst position. He'd shown up late to the interview, slurred his words, couldn't answer basic questions. I told him, the CEO had told me, to give him a chance. But after he embarrassed himself in front of the senior partners, I withdrew the offer. No hard feelings, I thought. Professional mismatch. I didn't antagonize him. Yet here I was, accused. The investigation was a blur. My boss's sympathetic eyes, the union rep's thin smile, the interrogation room's harsh light. They played back emails I'd sent detailing performance expectations. They twisted my constructive feedback into something sinister. You're irresponsible. You don't belong here. Innocent statements, but now repurposed as harassment. Eli swore I'd threatened him, that I'd used my power to intimidate. HR loved that angle. They wanted a quick resolution, and admitting fault was easier than wading through litigation. I called Sloane as soon as I got home. Her voice on the line was the only thing that kept me from falling to my knees. They're trying to ruin me, I'd said, voice trembling. And she was my rock. She sat me down, brewed me tea, and coaxed me to breathe. He's family, she repeated, over and over, each syllable like a lifeline. He's just lost. He'll admit it's a mistake once this blows over. I believed her, so I dropped it. I told HR to close the case. I didn't want a public fight. I didn't want to drag Eli's name through the mud. I didn't want to give my colleagues fodder to gossip about a man unfit to lead if he couldn't handle a personnel issue. I surrendered, swallowed my pride, and watched them erase my complaint and sweep the investigation under the corporate rug. In those days, I convinced myself forgiveness was love. But it was cowardice masquerading as compassion. I thought I was protecting our marriage, preserving family harmony. I thought Sloane's gratitude would outweigh the humiliation. Instead, it planted a seed of entitlement in Eli and a sense of obligation in her that mutated into presumption. Sitting there now, staring at the ocean beyond the balcony, I asked myself why I'd been so quick to forgive. Not because he was family, but because I was too afraid to fight. Fear of confrontation, of breaking her heart, of fracturing her relationship with her brother. I told myself that it would never happen again, that she'd stand by me if it did. But I was wrong. Now, 2 years later, I realized the cost of that choice. I'd protected Eli's reputation at the expense of my own. I'd believed Sloane's promise that he'd learn his lesson, that he'd be lost, but not malicious. I'd given her every opportunity to defend me afterward. Every chance to stand between his lie and my reality, but she'd chosen silence. When I confronted her in private, she brushed it off with soothing words and kisses. He's your brother, too, she'd said. But it wasn't my brother. It was a stranger with my name on his lips and my career in his crosshairs. Those months of recovery had been torture. I slept fitfully, racked with nightmares of office corridors darkened by whispers of my misconduct. My colleagues cast furtive glances. I lost a promotion I was promised. And every time I saw Eli afterward, family dinners, Christmas gatherings, he wore that smug half-smile, as if he believed he'd won. Sloane never apologized. She never once asked me if I'd reconsidered pressing charges. She just moved on. I traced the rim of my coffee mug with a fingertip, feeling the smooth ceramic under my skin. The memory made me ache, but it fueled a quiet resolve. The betrayal was twofold. Eli's obvious treachery and Sloane's calculated indifference. My love for her had blinded me to her complicity. I'd assumed that her instinct would be to defend our marriage above all else. Instead, she had chosen her brother. Always. I thought about reaching for my phone, calling her, demanding an explanation. but the sound of her voice now would be poison. I had already silenced her access, obfuscated her trail. The power balance had shifted. No longer would her words hold sway over my decisions. No longer would her pleas override my boundaries. I stood up, tapping the laptop to sleep mode. I closed the lid. The list of completed tasks glowed faintly in my peripheral vision. Transfers done, cards canceled, planner notified. A small comfort in a maelstrom of old scars. Tomorrow, I would contact Kendra again and begin planning our next steps. There were legal options I'd refused to explore once upon a time, and now I'd embrace them. Lawsuits, subpoenas, public disclosures, I would wield truth as a weapon. But tonight, I'd allow myself to remember. To honor the version of me who offered forgiveness, and to acknowledge the naive fool I'd once been. I stepped back onto the balcony, inhaled deeply, and watched the waves pound against the cliffs below. Each one ended in foam and retreat, then built up again without hesitation. I envied that relentless persistence. I envied its refusal to yield to obstacles. I decided then that I would be like those waves, unyielding, inevitable, remaking the shore in my own image. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt clarity. I felt purpose. And I felt the beginning of a man who would finally say no. No to betrayal. No to manipulation. And no to the woman who once taught me that forgiveness was weakness. Now, forgiveness felt like folly, and the only path forward was justice. And I would have it. I drove north the morning after the transfers, leaving the ocean and the hotel's pale blue facade behind me, following the highway as it wound through sleepy towns and stretches of pines. My phone lay silent on the passenger seat, and I refused every call that came through, Sloane's frantic ring, Marcus's concerned texts, even the bank's confirmation alerts. I needed space to think clearly, to feel the air without her voice echoing in my head. By midday, I found myself pulling into the gravel driveway of Kendra Ellis's farmhouse office, the same place she'd handled my most complex tax audits years ago, back when she was a bright-eyed lawyer who believed every number told a story. Her place looked the same, a weathered red barn repurposed into a law library, bookshelves lining the walls, a battered leather couch in the corner, and sunlight streaming in through tall windows. Kendra emerged from behind the desk before I even set foot inside, her curly hair tied back, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and that discerning gaze that once made me confess financial mistakes I didn't even know I was making. "Grayson," she said, voice warm but cautious. "You look like hell." She'd always been blunt. No small talk, no wasted sympathy. She crossed the room and hugged me briefly, then pulled back to study my face. I saw curiosity mixed with concern. I wondered how much she already knew. I sank onto the leather couch, smoothing the wrinkles in my jacket even though the fabric was uncrushable. "It's worse than I thought," I said. "I overheard Sloane on the porch. She promised to cover Eli's debt with my money." I let the words hang there, heavy as lead. She nodded slowly, folding her long fingers together. I continued, "Eli, you remember him. He almost destroyed my career with that false harassment claim. 2 years ago, I swallowed my pride and dropped it. Sloane begged me. She said he was lost. Now she's betrayed me with the same brutal efficiency." Kendra's eyes darkened. She leaned forward. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I outlined the overheard conversation, the silent transfers, the frozen accounts, and the bank notifications that would hit her by this afternoon. I told her about my feeling of invisibility in our marriage, about the long nights I spent reconciling her purchases and his debts. I spoke of my anger, yes, but more of the disbelief, how the person I loved most could so casually weaponize our shared life. Kendra didn't interrupt. She scribbled notes on a legal pad, dog-eared pages marking sections on financial abuse and marital fraud. When I finished, she set the pad aside and stood, walking over to the shelves. She pulled down a thick binder stamped Forensic Audits and flipped through to a tab labeled Marital Asset Protection. She returned and sat across from me, placing the binder between us like a barrier. "You want justice," she said softly. "But justice costs time, money, and a willingness to get messy. Are you ready?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, it was practical. I nodded firmly. "I want both." I wasn't the man who believed forgiveness was love anymore. I was the man who believed consequences taught respect. She opened the binder to a checklist. "First, we need documentation. Bank statements, emails, voicemails, anything that proves she knew she was misusing joint assets." You've already recorded her voice. Good. Next, we subpoena financial records from the bank. Then, we file for a temporary restraining order to prevent her from further transfers. Simultaneously, we draft a petition for divorce with an emergency hearing request. We'll argue that her actions constitute financial abandonment. I felt a knot loosen in my chest as she laid out the battle plan. For the first time since I'd heard her voice on that porch, I felt anchored. Kendra paused and looked at me meaningfully. "There's one more step," she said, her pen tapping the desk. "You need to decide what you truly want from this. Money can be restored. Property can be divided. But your emotional well-being, your trust, once broken, is harder to reclaim." I considered her words, reflecting on the nights I'd stayed silent, the mornings I'd forced cheerfulness for appearances, the sense that I lived in the background of my own life. "I want to rebuild," I said, "but not with her. With someone who sees me as more than a resource. Someone who understands boundaries." Kendra nodded, closing the binder with a deliberate snap. "Then we begin," she said. She reached for her phone and dialed the bank's litigation department. "I'm Kendra Ellis, legal counsel for Grace and Langford. We require full statements of account activity for the period June through September of this year, with supporting documentation for any transfers over $10,000. As she spoke, I felt a surge of empowerment wash over me. The calm authority in her voice contrasted sharply with the desperation I'd worn like a coat for months. While she spoke, I opened my own briefcase and pulled out a folder containing the audio recording, copies of the transfer confirmations, and a binding agreement, drafted in secret 6 months ago, establishing me as sole owner of our shared assets. I slid it across the desk. Kendra glanced at it and smiled, a rare softening of her precise features. "Well done," she said. "This will streamline things." By the time the call ended, a plan was in motion. Subpoenas would be issued, preliminary injunctions filed, and the courthouse notified of an emergency divorce hearing. Kendra looked at me, eyes bright with professional zeal. "Tomorrow, we'll draft the initial filings. I'll handle everything on paper. You just need to stay focused and avoid contact with her." She handed me a blank notepad. "Write down any further incidents or communications. Even small things matter." We spent the next hour detailing the timeline, annotating each event with dates, times, and potential witnesses. I confessed my anxieties, fear that I'd be seen as ungrateful or vindictive, or worse, that Sloane's family would turn public opinion against me. Kendra listened without judgment, then offered a simple truth. "You're reclaiming your life, and the world will respect that more than you think." When I left her office, the sky was turning a deep violet, and the first stars had begun to appear. I felt a tremor of anticipation, like the moment before an avalanche breaks free. The betrayal and the betrayal of trust had set me on this path. Now, with a trusted ally by my side, I knew I could navigate the storm. As I walked back to my car, I realized that asking for justice wasn't just about punishing her. It was about honoring myself, demanding that the life I built be respected, not violated. I drove off into the evening, the road ahead illuminated by my headlights and a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't look back, not because I was dismissive, but because I was determined. Chapter 4 had ended, and Chapter 5, whatever it held, would find me ready. The first morning after Kendra and I left her office, I woke to a silent phone that felt heavier than ever. No messages from Sloane demanding answers, no frantic calls from Marcus, no bank notifications, just emptiness. I lay on the rented condo's stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint lines where the paint had cracked. In that moment, I realized I had crossed into uncharted territory. I was officially missing. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb the deserted apartment, and moved to the living room window overlooking the city. The streets below were already waking up. Commuters with coffee cups, delivery vans unloading crates of produce, joggers with earbuds. Life carried on without me. A tiny part of me felt triumphant, but most of me felt hollow, as though I had shed a skin I never intended to leave behind. I opened the small balcony door and let the morning air clear my head. Salt from the ocean still lingered in my lungs, even 80 miles inland. Back inside, I made instant coffee in a chipped mug that smelled faintly of bleach. I pressed play on the voicemail icon. There were 7 messages, Sloane's voice strained and panicked, asking where I was, if I'd landed, if I was hurt. I listened without responding. Her desperation rang false to my ears now, like a telemarketer's apology after hanging up on them. I deleted the first message, then the next, until only a single one remained. Grayson, please call me. I love you. I'm scared. I left that one untouched. I didn't know why. I spent the rest of the morning drafting emails to Kendra, an update on the lack of contact, my plan to keep a low profile for now, and the confirmation that Sloane's frantic attempts had yet to yield any insight into my location. I didn't mention the guilt that twisted in my chest each time I heard her voice, as if her fear was my fault. I sent the emails and waited for her response. When it came, succinct, professional, asking only for copies of Sloane's voicemails and any bank logs. It grounded me. I forwarded everything in a single PDF, then closed my laptop. The condo felt too spacious for one person, so I decided to venture out. I slipped into a dark hoodie and jeans, grabbed my wallet and the burner phone Kendra provided, and headed downstairs. I walked to a cafe 2 blocks away, ordered a black coffee, and parked myself at a corner table with a view of the street. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe a clue that Sloane had arrived, or that Eli was trailing me. But I found nothing more than the crackle of morning radio and the hiss of espresso machines. Around midday, I noticed a woman at the next table, furtively glancing at her own phone while rehearsing something under her breath. She spoke into the receiver. "Tell me where he is, or I'll..." Her voice faltered. I leaned back, feigning nonchalance, but my heart pounded. Was that Sloane? I watched as she gathered her things and hurried out. I considered following but held back. Discretion mattered. If I ran into her here, the nest of lies I was weaving would unravel too soon. Instead, I returned to the condo and checked the mailbox. No letters, no notes, only a bill for a phone line I no longer used, which I tossed into the recycling bin. As afternoon light filtered through the curtains, I sank onto the couch and dialed Eli's number from my real phone, an impulsive act I immediately regretted. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. The message that played was clipped. "Hey, it's Eli. If you need me, you know what to do." He hung up before saying anything else. The same arrogance that fueled everything. I ended the call without leaving a message. I spent the next hour mapping out Sloane's potential moves on a notebook page, sketching our home's layout, bank branch locations, even routes she might take to reach me. Each path ended at a dead end. I realized that every step she took was based on assumptions she could no longer rely on. The money was gone. My presence was obscured. The comfortable certainties she counted on were illusions. That evening, I watched as the sun dipped below the skyline from the balcony. I scrolled through my email and saw Kendra's reply. The subpoenas had been served, the bank was complying, and the court date was set for early next week. She advised that I maintain radio silence until then, to avoid any missteps that could jeopardize our filings. I closed the email and pocketed my phone. Just before darkness fell, I heard my primary line buzz, an unknown caller. Instinctively, I grabbed my burner, answered. A distorted voice whispered, "Check the balance again, Eli." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, mind racing. It could be Eli covering tracks, or Sloane sending a taunt, or someone else entirely, maybe even Kendra testing my resolve. It didn't matter. The message was clear. She was looking, she was scheming, and she was close enough to plant seeds of doubt and fear. I slid the phone into my pocket and walked back inside. The apartment lights flickered on my face in the mirrors by the door. I studied my reflection, eyes rimmed red, cheeks drawn, jaw clenched. I was a ghost, someone who used to be defined by his presence in a home that no longer felt like mine. But I had work to do. I had a plan. I opened my laptop one last time and typed a brief note to Marcus. "Out of town. We'll call next week. No apologies, no explanations. Just facts." I hit send. As I shut the computer, I felt a shift, like the moment gravity changes direction. I was no longer running. I was positioning myself. Each voicemail Sloane left, each frantic search, only proved how deep her dependence on me ran. And with each passing hour that I stayed hidden, I reclaimed a bit more of my life. Night settled over the city, lights glimmering like distant stars. I stood at the balcony, coffee long cold, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would bring courtroom battles, subpoenas, and divorce filings. But tonight, I allowed myself a small moment of triumph. I had become the architect of my own disappearance, and in doing so, I found a clarity I had thought lost forever. And somewhere out there, Sloane was listening. The envelope hit the welcome mat just after dawn, its bulk unexpected and unnerving. I woke to the familiar chirp of my phone's alarm, but before I could silence it, a new vibration in my pocket announced a text from Kendra. Prepare for impact. Trust document and note should arrive this morning. I smirked at her precise timing. No surprises, no chaos, then slid out of bed and dressed quickly in jeans and a dark sweater. The Chicago air was crisp as I stepped onto the balcony, skyline frosted in early light, but the thrill of anticipation warmed me from the inside out. I fetched the mail, a stack of bills, a postcard from a charity I never supported, and the heavy manila envelope I'd sent to Sloane. No stamp of return, of course. It was addressed to our home under her maiden name, ensuring it would land squarely in her hands while keeping my involvement anonymous until the moment she opened it. I took the rest of the mail back in and carried the envelope to my desk, resisting the urge to peek inside. The contents weren't for me. They were for her. By mid-morning, the first ripple of activity began. My burner phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted number. I let it ring out. No point in answering a call that would only remind Sloane I still existed. Minutes later, the primary line lit up. I ignored it, then watched as the voicemail icon glowed. I dialed in and pressed play. A frantic voice, unmistakably Sloane's, choked out, "Grayson, please, check your trust documents. It might explain everything. I don't understand." Her tone was a mixture of fear and confusion, so unlike the commanding certainty she displayed only days before. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes and letting her panic settle around me like mist. I'd written the trust 6 months ago, quietly and methodically assembling the clauses that granted me sole ownership of our assets, house, cars, investments, everything she assumed we co-owned. She'd never known it existed until this morning. I smiled. She'd never see the next part coming. A second voicemail followed almost immediately, this time from her mother's number. "Honey, it's your mother. I don't know what's going on, but the trustee called me. We need to talk. Please, Grayson, call your mother-in-law." Her mother's wavering voice spoke of hurt and betrayal rather than anger, but it stung all the same. I'd never considered that her family might get drawn in, but that was on her for entangling my life with theirs in the first place. As the sun climbed, the calls and voicemails multiplied. Marcus, my assistant, her friends, and even a local attorney who'd represented them once upon a time. All left messages framed as gentle, concerned inquiries. "I'm here if you need anything. Would love to catch up. Hope you're safe." I deleted them one by one, relishing the gravity of each disappearance. Each one was a drop in the bucket of consequences she now had to face. By lunchtime, I retrieved a carefully composed email from my drafts folder and sent it to Sloane's personal and work addresses. It contained only 2 sentences. "You said I'd never say no. You were wrong. All assets are transferred to my sole ownership under the trust agreement you've just received." I hit send and closed my laptop, feeling an odd sense of liberation as the message flew off into the digital void. The rest of the afternoon was devoted to details. I logged into the offshore account one last time to confirm that no unexpected transfers had occurred. Everything was exactly as I planned. No stray withdrawals, no lingering joint obligations, no loopholes she could exploit. I updated my spreadsheets and exported them to a secure drive, then locked it behind multiple layers of encryption. In moments like these, discipline felt like a shield against the chaos she'd created. At 3:17 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. My heart rate quickened. Instinct told me to ignore it, but curiosity pinned me in place. I slipped off my chair and moved toward the peephole. Through the small circle of glass, I saw Sloane, her hair disheveled, eyes red from crying, and in her arms a covered glass dish, lasagna. I recognized the shape. She clutched it to her chest like a lifeline. I stepped back, closing the door silently before her knock could fall on my ears. I didn't want to watch her. I didn't want to feel her pain. I realized then that mercy and vengeance could coexist in the same person, but pity had no place in my reclamation. I didn't want to see her broken. I wanted her to absorb the full weight of her actions without distraction. Her 3 frantic knocks echoed through the apartment. I watched the dish on the key rack as it shook side to side, each tremor a testament to her desperation. I didn't move. I didn't reply. I just stood there, the silence in the hallway as thick as the guilt she carried. After a minute that felt like an eternity, her sobbing broke through the door, a raw, guttural sound that would have drawn me in under different circumstances. But not now. I closed my eyes and turned away, focusing instead on the coordinates of my new life laid out on the whiteboard across the room. New firm launch, secure office lease, leadership retreat in 2 weeks, personal time off in 1 month. Every plan, every bullet point, a step beyond her reach. By the time she left, her sobs had faded into a distant whimper. I waited a full 5 minutes before checking the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the lasagna dish remained. I stepped out, retrieved it, and placed it on the counter in the kitchen. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air. I looked at the handwritten note taped to the top. "Grayson, please, we can fix this. I love you." I peeled off the note and dropped it in the trash. I reheated a portion of the lasagna, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen island, eating in silence. The rich sauce was comforting, oddly, and I realized that even in the worst betrayals, small acts of care could remain sincere. But sincerity deserved respect, not exploitation. That evening, I dressed for a quiet dinner meeting with a potential investor, someone entirely unconnected to my personal drama. I rehearsed my talking points as I looked in the mirror. Steady eye contact, confident posture, clear objectives. I didn't need Sloan to define me or my reputation. I was, in every sense, my own man now. Before I left, I glanced at the lasagna dish and felt a brief pang of guilt that quickly dissolved into resolve. Some bridges, once burned, could never support a crossing again. And some people, after they've collected too many favors, must learn to stand on their own feet or sink under the weight of their debts. I grabbed my briefcase and locked the apartment door with deliberate calm. As I descended the elevator, I felt the corridor grow wider, the world more expansive. The echoes of Sloane's voice were replaced by the hum of possibilities waiting outside. That night, I dined under soft restaurant lighting, pitching new ventures with precision and flair. My laughter was genuine, my focus unbroken. I realized that everything I'd lost in my marriage, peace of mind, trust, partnership, could be rebuilt in places where integrity mattered more than convenience. And as I toasted to my future, I acknowledged the truth. Some doors should remain closed, some routes forever abandoned. But every ending held the promise of a new beginning, and I was determined to walk that path on my own terms. I first realized something was wrong when I opened my inbox to find an urgent email from Kendra titled "Red Flags and Transaction History." My heart skipped, imagining the worst, but I forced my fingers to tap open the attachment. There it was, a meticulously annotated spreadsheet tracing each cent that had flowed through our joint accounts in the last 2 months. There were deposits and withdrawals I had orchestrated in my hotel room transfers. Yes, but then there were 3 large, unexplained outflows totaling $72,000, all labeled ED, and each one debiting my supposedly frozen account. My chest tightened as I stared at the numbers. I had thought I'd covered every exit point, encrypted every password, blocked every loophole, and yet, she had slipped through. Sloan had moved more money out of my accounts without my knowledge, paying off her brother's debts long before I even knew the totals. It was infuriating. It was humiliating. It was proof that she'd been planning her betrayal for months, not hours, as I'd originally believed. I called Kendra immediately and poured out my frustration. She listened quietly, then replied steadily, "We report these as unauthorized transfers. We file a claim with the bank. We include the trust document you sent and the recorded voice memo as evidence she knowingly misused joint assets." I stood in my empty apartment kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, as if Sloane's betrayal itself was echoing off the counters. Within the hour, Kendra had filed the paperwork. A detailed affidavit, the bank transaction logs, the trust agreement proving my sole ownership, and my sworn statement. Then came the subpoena for Sloane's financial planner and the deposition scheduled for the following week. While Kendra handled every legal maneuver, I readied myself mentally for the hearing, a confrontation I'd once feared but now craved. Because this time, the truth would win. By the day of the hearing, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I arrived at the courthouse in a tailored suit that mirrored my resolve. Inside the packed courtroom, I saw Sloane's face transform from confident composure to betrayed panic when the judge called the case. Kendra stood at my side, dossier in hand, a silent fortress of expertise. When the bank's representative took the stand, he laid out the paper trail. Transfers on July 1st, July 14th, and July 28th, each for $24,000. Labeled to pay a third party identified as ED, matching the beneficiary account of Ms. Langford's brother. The judge nodded, and I watched Sloane's color drain. Then Kendra cross-examined her financial planner, who testified that Sloane had personally authorized transfers she believed were part of a shared obligation. But when confronted with the trust document, he conceded he'd never seen it, because Sloane never disclosed it. The tension in the room was electric as I rose to speak, heart-pounding but voice steady. Your Honor, the defendant claims I promised to cover these debts. Yet there is no written agreement, no signature, no documented consent. Only her words. And in financial law, words without documentation hold no weight against statutory protections of trust agreements. The gavel fell with a finality I felt deep in my core. Minutes later, the judge ruled in my favor. The unauthorized transfers were reversed in full, the funds returned to the offshore account, and the brother, Eli, his full name now attached to reports of credit card fraud, was officially pursued by the bank's legal department. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Across the courtroom, Sloane sat motionless, tears welling but no words left to justify her actions. Her friends and family, who had once pleaded for compassion, now stared at her in shock, their misplaced loyalty evaporated. As we walked out, Kendra leaned in and whispered, "Justice isn't revenge. It's restoration." I nodded, feeling the weight of every deceit lifted from my shoulders. Outside, the summer air felt different, lighter, almost sweet. I realized that by refusing to press charges against Eli 2 years ago, I'd planted the seeds for this very reckoning. But today, testimony, documents, and legal statutes had spoken louder than manipulation and coercion. And though the courtroom battle was won, I knew the real victory was rediscovering my own worth. No longer would I be the man who silently endured. I was the man who demanded respect, defended his boundaries, and reclaimed everything he built. And as I stepped into the bright afternoon, I felt the first stirrings of peace, hard-earned, irrevocable, and entirely my own. When I received the formal invitation to dinner at Sloane's parents' estate, I almost laughed. An olive branch from the very people who'd stood by while she betrayed me, then had the gall to suggest I lacked communication skills. Still, I agreed. I needed to face them head-on, to close this chapter on my own terms. That Friday evening, I parked my car in the sweeping circular drive of their manicured lawn and adjusted the collar of my black button-down shirt. I felt 1,000 eyes on me. Neighbors strolling past wrought iron gates, distant headlights trailing the drive, yet I moved forward with steady purpose. Inside, the foyer's marble floor gleamed under a crystal chandelier. Sloane's mother, Claudia, greeted me with a trembling smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her father, Robert, offered a stiff nod from behind a cluster of orchids. Their house smelled of lavender and old money. They ushered me through hallways lined with family portraits. Grinning Easters, perfect Christmases, formal graduations, the conjured image of togetherness now hollow in my mind. In the dining room, Sloane sat at the table's center, flanked by her parents and Eli. The table was set with fine china, each place marker embroidered with our initials in gold. I let my gaze sweep over the place where my name sat, no longer mine, really, and then rested on Sloane's face, taut with regret. She rose as I entered, voice small. "Thanks for coming." I nodded curtly, my eyes drifting to the divorce papers and a slender envelope propped beside her plate. There, as much a guest as the silverware. Her father cleared his throat, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. "Eli," he said, "the evening is about reconciliation. Perhaps we can begin by acknowledging," he faltered under my gaze, "by acknowledging that mistakes were made." I sat, folding my hands on my lap. "Eli cost me my career," I said quietly, "and Sloane cost me my trust. And my money." Silence fell like a stone. Claudia paled, clutched the table's edge. "Grayson, we're sorry." I interrupted, voice low, measured. "Sorry doesn't reverse unauthorized transfers. Sorry doesn't repair reputation's drag race through HR. Sorry doesn't reinstate frozen credit lines. Sorry doesn't unbreak vows." My words echoed in the high ceiling. Eli shifted uncomfortably, gaze fixed on his napkin. I never asked her to do it," he stammered. "She did it on her own." "On her own," I repeated, eyes narrowing. "The same way she did when she pleaded me to drop charges against you." Eli burst. "I'm sorry, but it fell without weight." Sloane lifted the divorce papers. "We can negotiate a settlement," she said, voice brittle. "I want to work something out." I took the envelope, smiled without warmth, and placed it before her mother. "No settlement," I said. "Everything is already mine under the trust. You can negotiate with the lawyer. I'll handle the paperwork." The table tensed. My plate remained uneaten as the air crackled. Sloane's mother dabbed at her eyes. Claudia's voice shook. "But this is our home. Your family." "Family," I echoed. "Family doesn't weaponize love. Family doesn't treat marriage like an ATM. Family protects each other, not profits from betrayal." Robert's jaw clenched. "You could have told us." I leaned forward. "You didn't ask. You chose to believe her version. You didn't question when she withdrew funds labeled for gambling debt. You only texted condolences when I went missing." My gaze went to Sloane. "I tried silence, forgiveness, trust. Each time, you all sided against me." I rose, chair scraping. "I'm not your son," I said, voice firm. "I'm not your friend. I'm a man you allowed to be used." I slid the envelope of divorce papers to the center of the table. "I keep what's mine." Then I turned and walked away, boots echoing on marble, past the chamber's stunned faces, out through the foyer, and into the night. Outside, the humid air hit me like freedom. I leaned against my car, eyes closed, chest heaving with relief and residual anger. The ornate house stood silent behind me, lights dimming. I realized I felt no regret. I'd reclaimed my dignity. The people who claimed to love me had tried to break me. I left them accountable to their own conscience. As I drove away, neighborhood gates clicking shut behind me, I thought of the bridges I'd burned, some irrevocably, yes, but necessary. I had no illusions about the future. My name might be mentioned in family gossip, in whispers at charity galas, but those worlds no longer concerned me. I'd emerged unbroken. I pulled onto the highway under a sky washed with stars. The next stretch of road led to my new office, my new life, and I felt the acceleration of possibilities humming beneath my tires. Chapter 8 closed behind me, as irrevocable as that night's final click of the front door. The courthouse steps felt strangely familiar as I descended them that morning, not as a petitioner this time, but as a spectator in my own life's unraveling. The headlines had already blared the divorce and the fraud case, and gossip rippled through social media. I wore a simple gray suit and no tie, wanting to appear unbothered yet composed. Beneath that calm exterior, I carried the weight of every public stare, every whispered question. Why did he leave her? Wasn't he rich enough already? I slipped into a quiet cafe across the street, ordered an espresso, and settled into a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. My phone vibrated with notifications, friends reaching out, colleagues offering condolences, Sloane supporters decrying me as a heartless opportunist. I didn't delete the notifications. Let them watch. Let them wonder what they didn't know. Across from me, I unfolded the printout of the audio recording that Kendra had leaked, Sloane's own words admitting, "He'll never say no to me." It had gone viral by yesterday afternoon, turning public sympathy from her favor to mine in the span of a news cycle. I traced my finger along the transcript, remembering the tremor in her voice, the confession that had sealed her downfall. In that moment, I realized how powerful truth could be when wielded properly. A barista placed my espresso on the table. I nodded in thanks and took a sip, bitter, strong, yet invigorating. I reached for my notebook and began jotting down ideas for my new firm's branding. Integrity first, built on trust. Slogans that once would have been cliché now felt elemental. Each word I wrote was a commitment to the man I wanted to become, a counterpoint to the man who had once tolerated betrayal. Mid-morning, I heard the bell above the cafe door jingle and looked up. Sloane's mother, Claudia, stepped in, eyes puffy, clutching the lasagna dish I had brought back after our final dinner. My heart skipped, not with longing, but with recognition of how far we'd fallen. She saw me and hesitated, then approached. "Grayson," she said quietly, voice laced with guilt. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. She sat, set the dish on the table, and folded her hands. I wanted to return this," she began, throat tight. "I'm so sorry for everything. I never believed she'd go this far." I looked at her, seeing a woman caught between love for her daughter and the stark reality of her choices. "Your daughter chose her path," I said evenly. "You enabled it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting her," she whispered. "I never imagined she'd use me too." I leaned back, weighing my response. Empathy flickered. I knew the pain of parental love. But I also knew that regret didn't undo damage. "If you truly want to help," I said, Stop idealizing her. Encourage her to face consequences. She needs accountability, not comfort. She nodded, crestfallen. I understand. She stood, picked up the dish, and placed a crumpled $20 bill on the table, a small gesture to cover the cost. I didn't refuse. Thank you, I said, meaning it. It was the first genuine exchange of kindness since this all began. After she left, I cleaned my notebook and packed away the audio transcript. The cafe felt emptier, quieter, as if the world had shifted again. I stood, placed a few bills on the table, and headed out into the midday sun. On the sidewalk, I paused and looked back at the cafe windows, my reflection flickering alongside patrons whose lives moved on without me. I realized I hadn't looked back once, at our old home, at our memories. I didn't need to. What mattered was forward. The new firm's launch next month, the rented loft above the office, the team I was assembling of honest people, the clients I would protect from deceit because I knew its power too well. I walked to my car and drove toward my new office in downtown Chicago. The city hummed around me, each honk and footstep a reminder that life was in motion. I felt the hum resonate within me. Chapter 9 wasn't just about aftermath, it was about resurrection. I glanced at the lasagna dish, still perched on the passenger seat, and smiled faintly, a reminder that even in the wreckage of old bridges, small acts of goodwill remain possible. And as the skyline came into view, glass towers glinting in the afternoon sun, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, rebuilding not just a business, but a life grounded in truth, respect, and unbreakable boundaries. I was halfway through my evening routine, setting out tomorrow's clothes, reviewing the final draft of our investor proposal, and brewing a pot of chamomile tea, when I heard it, a soft knock at my door. At first, I froze, tea kettle in hand, as if the sound itself carried the weight of every lie and broken promise from the past 6 months. My chest tightened, and I felt the familiar echo of betrayal coil in my gut. I didn't move. I simply listened. Knock, pause, knock. Through the peephole, I saw Sloane's face. Eyes red and glassy, lips trembling, hair mussed as if she'd been running. She held something pressed against her chest under a folded towel. I recognized the shape instantly. A baking dish. Lasagna, probably, her favorite way to reach me once. I lowered myself against the door, heart thudding with a mixture of pity and resolve. A third knock came, more tentative, as if she feared I might have vanished entirely. The old me might have rushed to the door, heart leaping with hope and regret, ready to forgive another transgression. But that man was gone. I let the seconds stretch into an uncomfortable quiet. The knock stopped. Footsteps receded down the hallway. I turned away and closed my eyes, letting the steady hum of the apartment's HVAC system replace the echo of her pleas. The past months had been a blur of courtroom hearings, police investigations into Eli's fraud, whispered gossip among her social circle, and endless meetings with Kendra to finalize my new firm structure, an entity built on transparency, integrity, and respect. I learned to treasure silence over manipulation, boundaries over convenience, and truth over betrayal. I walked to the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water, watching the golden liquid ripple as I leaned against the marble surface. The lasagna dish felt heavy in my palm, an artifact of a past life where comfort food symbolized love. Now it symbolized misplaced trust, of every favor I'd extended that had been used against me. I placed the dish on the counter, next to the stack of unopened mail. Notices from the courthouse, invitations to speaking engagements on financial ethics, and a single letter from Marcus announcing the official opening date of our Chicago office. I sank onto a bar stool, tracing the condensation ring on the glass with my fingertip. Night had fallen outside, city lights shimmering like constellations through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I thought of the life we once shared in that old house. Breakfasts at sunrise, long conversations on the porch, dreams woven over bottles of wine. All of it had been real, or at least I had believed it to be. But by the time I left, those memories were tainted, revealing cracks I'd ignored for too long. A voice in my head whispered, "Some people knock only after they've burned the bridge." I'd said it once before, and I said it again now, under my breath. A mantra, a lesson. I took a sip of water and closed my eyes, letting the cool calm wash over me. The investor proposal lay on my desk, pages marked with my scrawl. Expand client base, implement audit transparency, partner with ethics-driven firms. My vision for the new firm wasn't just about profit. It was about creating a space where trust was non-negotiable. I wanted to be the leader I'd always needed, someone who valued honesty above convenience, integrity above expedience. Tomorrow, I would present that proposal to a panel of venture capitalists in Miami. I'd worked tirelessly for this moment, crafting the business model, assembling a team of former colleagues who shared my values, negotiating office space in the Loop, and securing pre-launch clients willing to vouch for our approach. This firm would stand as a testament to what can rise from the ashes of deceit, a stronger, more transparent enterprise. I glanced at the lasagna dish again, then back to the city skyline. In the quiet of my apartment, I felt the edges of old wounds begin to seal. I realized that mercy and boundaries are not mutually exclusive. I could feel compassion for Sloane's pain without relinquishing the safeguards I'd built around my heart. I could acknowledge her remorse, even if I doubted its sincerity, while maintaining my resolve to move forward, unencumbered. In the hallway outside my door, the lights flickered. I imagined her footsteps once more, hesitant, desperate, seeking a door that would open. But her knocking had ended, and I had chosen silence. I had chosen myself. I stood and retrieved my coat from the closet, draping it over my arm. The lasagna dish remained on the counter, undisturbed. I picked it up one last time, examining the flecks of cheese crisp at the edges. I slid it into the small trash bin and closed the lid, swallowing a knot of conflicting emotions. A part of me mourned what we once had. A larger part of me celebrated the freedom I'd reclaimed. Turning off the lights, I stepped into the living room and picked up my briefcase. It was heavier than I remembered, a tangible symbol of my new responsibilities and ambitions. I clicked the lock shut and slipped it over my shoulder. Before leaving, I walked to the balcony door, paused, and looked at the building across the street. A neighbor's window was lit, revealing a silhouette reading a book. Life went on, blind to the silent dramas behind closed doors. The city pulsed with stories of betrayal and redemption, but my story was changing its final chapter tonight. I closed the balcony door, leaving only the hum of the night and the promise of dawn. As I descended the elevator, I realized I was no longer the man who needed to knock on doors to reclaim his worth. I was the man who set the keys on the counter, walked away, and never looked back. When the lobby doors opened, I stepped into the cool night air and took a deep breath. The street was quiet, the world indifferent to my choices. Yet in that moment, I felt invincible, a man who had turned his greatest betrayal into his greatest strength, whose boundaries were unbreakable, whose truth was undeniable. And as I walked toward the car that would take me to the airport and the next leg of my journey, I carried with me a clarity I had never known before. Some bridges, once burned, light the way to new horizons rather than the path back home.